Welcome to another edition of the News Review. In this edition, the Kremlin says Western sanctions are to blame for problems with gas supply to European countries, rejecting claims that Russia uses energy as a political tool amid tensions with the West.
Problems with gas supply arose because of the sanctions imposed on our country and several Russian companies by Western states, including Germany and Britain. There are no other reasons that lead to problems with supplies. Obviously, the only turbine is working and it is malfunctioning. Breakages happen there that leads to supply stoppages.
Peskov said sanctions are causing chaos in terms of maintenance work on the Nord Stream 1 gas pipeline between Russia and Germany. The Russian energy giant Gazprom has completely halted supplies through the pipeline, saying that it has detected a leak during a maintenance work last week. The Kremlin spokesman has, however, warned that Russia would retaliate against a proposal by the group of 7 developed countries to impose a price cap on Russian oil. The G7 finance minister agreed to the proposal on Friday in a bid to pressure Russia over its war in Ukraine. Moscow says it will stop selling oil to any country that implements the price cap. To discuss that further, we're joined by Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author from London, and Scott Bennett, former U.S. Army psychological warfare officer from San Francisco. Let's begin with Mr. Papadopoulos. If you could please tell us how justified you see Russia's response to the complete halt in the flow of gas in Nord Stream 1 pipeline, citing the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia, which stop it from being able to continue the maintenance of the gas pipeline.
Well, it is more than conceivable that Russia, buoyed on by the knowledge that thus far it is triumphing in the economic war between itself and the West, has taken the decision to halt gas supplies to Europe because it no longer depends on the European markets. After all, in the last 6 months or so, Russia has secured oil and gas contracts with numerous countries around the world to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. Coupled with that is the actuality that the Kremlin has also secured contracts to export grain, fertilizers, chemicals, and foodstuffs to also numerous countries around the world, and again, securing an immeasurable amount of money. However, it is my understanding that Russia has not stopped the supply of gas to all of Europe. It has certainly stopped the supply of gas via Nord Stream 1 to Germany and France. But it is my understanding, as I said, that Russia has not halted supply of gas to countries such as Hungary and Italy and Greece. So we really do need clarification on this. But turning to the European Union, well, their response today is peculiar and laughable, because this February, after the European Union imposed stringent sanctions on the Russian economy, the leadership of the EU boasted to the rest of the world that it did not depend on Russian gas. But here we are, 6 months on, the EU leadership today is castigating the Kremlin for having taken this decision. Well, which one is it, Brussels? Do you depend on Russian gas, or do you not depend on Russian gas? The brutal reality, of course, is that Russia is no longer dependent, as it once was for many years, on the European markets. However, Europe, especially countries such as Germany, are heavily reliant on Russian natural gas. And quite frankly, it demonstrates how the leadership of the EU has no compassion, has no empathy in regard to the needs of ordinary people in the European Union, because ordinary people in the European Union will pay a horrific price for the European Union having taken part in what is effectively an Anglo-American economic crusade against Russia.
So, Mr. Bennett, we just heard Mr. Papadopoulos elaborating on the situation there, but in your opinion, is there a way back for Europe, or is it already too late?
Well, I would disagree with his characterization of the decisions by the European leaders as peculiar and laughable. It is not peculiar, it is pathological. And it's not laughable, it's infuriating. And that is the only way back out of this, is to convince the European people that their leaders have completely abandoned all sanity, all rationality, all common sense for woke values, for a religion of climate change, this green delirium that has taken over the minds of these Klaus Schwab trained puppets like Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron and Schultz and Justin Trudeau. These petty tyrants have introduced a form of totalitarianism into Europe, and it is now backfiring. All of the European people are rising up against these tyrannical fools who have positioned themselves in leadership, and they are, I think you're going to witness a rising and an overthrow, if not through peaceful political choice, through violent revolution, because this gets deadly when winter comes and people don't have oil or gas, any means to heat their home or cook their food. They don't have food because of the cutback of fertilizer. All of these economic sanctions have been a form of political suicide. And the nonsense of trying to justify this self-inflicted death sentence upon the average Europeans using Russia's intervention into Ukraine, which Russia has no reason to apologize for. Russia is absolutely morally right for stepping into Ukraine and denazifying it and saving the lives of Eastern Europeans, Eastern Russians. So Russia doesn't have anything to apologize for, but it needs to get very, very vocal and depart from its traditional Russian cold-blooded chess player attitude and get quite hot-blooded and passionate and make direct appeals to the European people. Russia wants to sell oil to Europe. It wants to provide the heating oil and gas to keep Europeans alive, but the political leaders are stopping it. They're forbidding it. They're imposing price caps, which make it impossible to sell oil. The US CIA and intelligence and military-industrial complex is profiting by European suffering. So Russia really needs to ante up its game and directly communicate with the European people to hopefully arouse the election of new leadership that will say the Americans and NATO forces do not need to be in Ukraine. Ukraine is actually becoming the new Afghanistan, where countries go to crumble. It is the Medussa that everyone who looks at Ukraine favorably is now being turned to stone. Boris Johnson has collapsed. And I think you'll see the same occur with these other tyrants like Liz Truss and Schultz and Macron. They are on a very thin ice with their own people. So I think Russia needs to convince the Europeans the only way back is to abandon these political leaders, get new elected officials in who will actually put the values and the life of the Europeans ahead of the woke climate change values of these current elected officials.
So, Mr. Papadopoulos, Mr. Bennett just pointed to the price cap that the G7 finance ministers have agreed to put on Russian oil. And of course, we had Russia's reaction. Moscow reacted by saying that it will stop selling oil to any country that implements the price cap. How do you see the future of Russian oil and, of course, energy prices? Once again, it will definitely have a negative effect on energy prices.
Well, we have to view all of these developments in the context of the West and Russia being engaged in a bitter, enormous economic war with each other. And should Russia take the decision to halt the supply of oil to Europe, then that will be another death sentence that the ruling elites of the European Union will impose on the ordinary European man and woman. And we have to take into consideration that Russia has made it very clear to the people of Europe that it is not at war with them. Russia has made it clear that it is at war with the leadership of the European Union. And it was the European Union who fired the first shots, so to speak, in this economic war after the Americans and the British imposed sanctions on the Russian economy. And I believe that we are seeing some very encouraging developments in various parts of Europe. So there are tens of thousands of people protesting in the Netherlands, in Germany, in Italy, and in the Czech Republic against the EU's sanctions on Russia and against the supply of weaponry by the EU to Ukraine. Now, it is very telling that Western mainstream media, which is neither free nor independent, but is a part of the machinery of the Western ruling elites, has not mentioned one word of these gigantic protests across Europe. That demonstrates that the ruling elites in the West, and in particular in the European Union, are very, very alarmed. There will soon be elections in Italy, and it is widely believed that the new Italian Prime Minister will be very radical in its attitude towards the European Union and the European Union's stance on Russia. Then we have Viktor Orban, who is a truly patriotic Hungarian, a truly patriotic Hungarian leader who puts the Hungarian people first. Unlike for the leadership of the EU, which is utterly indifferent to the abject pain and suffering which the European man and woman will soon suffer as a result of the economic catastrophe which is impending. But the European Union elites will not suffer this winter. They will be very secure in their castles and their palaces and their mansions and their manors. Why? Because they are millionaires, or if they're not millionaires, they're multi-millionaires, and if they're not multi-millionaires, they are billionaires. So quite frankly, there is a very strong possibility of popular uprisings breaking out across Europe in which truly patriotic movements, patriotic parties come to power. And if that happens, then those countries could very well withdraw themselves from the EU's economic war against Russia, which would be good for those countries in terms of their domestic households and good for those countries in terms of their industries.
So, Mr. Bennett, I could see that you agree with most of what Mr. Papadopoulos just pointed out. So, do you see an end to EU as we know it?
Yeah, I would agree with Mr. Papadopoulos on that. There is going to be an end to the EU. There's going to be an end to the euro. The euro is already at 99 cents, down, $1 from what it was. All of Europe is imploding under the weight of this political tyranny and the totalitarianism imposed by Klaus Schwab and these ultra elites at the Global Economic Forum and Davos. I do see a lot of rising up against Europe and the United States too, attributed to the COVID-19 vaccine, for example, that is coming out more and more killing the populations that are forced to get it. So I think this is going to expand beyond Europe to the other democracies, Australia, Canada, the United States, Britain. They are all going to enter violent political upheaval. We're already suspecting a suspension of the American elections in November. The elites of Joe Biden, the walking zombie, is already preparing to call every person that voted for Trump a domestic terrorist. So that shows you just how fragile the political tenor is in the United States and elsewhere. So ironically enough, I think you're going to see a mass exodus to Russia from a lot of these European nations in people that can't take it anymore. They don't want to freeze to death, and Russia really is emerging as the new political leader and the new representative of freedom. As ironic as that sounds, they are truly emerging as that beacon of hope and freedom and liberty that is no longer in Europe. That is being quenched. So I also anticipate a lot of uprisings in Europe because of the mass refugee resettlement program that they've brought in from Africa and the Middle East to people that have been introduced to Europe from other countries. They are not accustomed to the massive depletion of energy to the point of maybe only a few hours a day. That could cause massive uprisings and accelerate the political shifts and movements that Mr. Papadopoulos was talking about. So I think a variety of forces are contributing to this instability in Europe. And the beneficiary seems to be the United States Central Intelligence Agency and the military-industrial complex. They are expecting to get wealthy from this at the cost of the lives of the Europeans. And I don't think it's going to occur, because at the end of the day, I think all of these political regimes in Europe and the centralized political bodies like the European Union and even NATO, they are all crumbling, and they will see this 10-year economic war that is climaxing in a kinetic war between NATO and Russia in the theater of Ukraine. All of this is going to mark an end and hopefully a restart to a more sane and balanced European American political entities and establishments. Right now, they are completely delusional with their self-importance, their narcissism, and indeed their pathological political suicide by cutting off all energy from Europe at a time where you're going to be facing some of the most severe winter temperatures and severe depletions of food ever in the history of Europe. So Europe is entering a dark age, and it's the European leaders that have turned out the lights. But Russia needs to get emphatically engaged in communicating directly to the people. And I think they would be very successful at turning the hearts and minds of the people away from these petty tyrants and towards a more sane policy of engaging with Russia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Scott Bennett, former U.S. Army psychological warfare officer from San Francisco, and Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author from London. Thanks to both of you gentlemen for sharing your thoughts and views with us on this edition of the News Review. And thanks to all of you viewers for following us.